I used to think loyalty mattered. 7 years at Barton & Wells Tech proved me wrong. I was there when the company was barely scraping by, when we were 5 people in a rented office that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. I built the early software architecture myself. I debugged lines of code until my eyes blurred. I slept on that office couch more times than I can remember. When Greg Lawson became head of operations, everything changed. He came in slick, confident, the kind of guy who knew how to shake hands with the right people and take credit from the quiet ones. He called me his core engineer. Said I was the backbone of the company. I believed him. Until the day he called me into his office. It was a Friday morning, the kind that feels suspiciously calm before a storm. I walked in expecting a promotion, or at least acknowledgement for the 3-month sprint I'd pulled to fix their flagship app before a major investor demo. Instead, Greg sat behind his glass desk, not looking at me, tapping his pen like he was rehearsing for sympathy. "Budget cuts," he said. Just like that. 2 words to erase 7 years. I didn't argue. I couldn't. The HR rep waiting outside the door already had my papers ready. They walked me out as if I'd stolen something. People stared, avoided eye contact, whispered. When I got home, I just sat there, staring at my hands, trying to process how easily everything I built could be taken from me. But it didn't make sense. Barton & Wells had just announced record revenue. I'd read the numbers myself. They weren't cutting budgets. They were expanding. And Greg had just signed a new lease for a luxury office downtown. So why me? I couldn't sleep that night. Around midnight, muscle memory kicked in. I opened my laptop, logged into an old backup server I'd kept from the company's early days. Back when I still handled admin access. Greg never revoked the credentials, probably because he didn't even know they existed. There it was. A project folder named Phoenix. I opened it and froze. Every line of code looked familiar, painfully familiar. It was mine. The algorithm I'd written 2 years ago to optimize data storage and reduce server costs. Except it wasn't under my name anymore. The metadata showed Greg as the author. He'd copied my work, renamed it, and was now presenting it as his own breakthrough to investors. The realization hit me in waves. He hadn't fired me to save money. He'd fired me to silence me. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor the only light in the room. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry, I was calm. Focused. Because now I had proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. Greg had friends in every boardroom that mattered. If I accused him, I'd look bitter, petty, another fired employee crying foul. I needed something bigger. A way to make him feel what he made me feel. Publicly. Permanently. I spent the weekend digging through archived emails and shared repositories. That's when I found a document hidden in a folder named Contracts Temp. It was a proposal for something called Northbridge Holdings, a shell company supposedly interested in acquiring Barton & Wells. But the digital signature at the bottom wasn't from any external investor. It was Greg's. He was preparing to sell the company, quietly, off the books, to himself under a fake name. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was stealing the entire company. I remember closing the laptop and just sitting there, listening to the hum of the city outside my apartment window. I'd always been the kind of man who followed the rules. Who believed in earning things the right way. But that night, something inside me shifted. Greg taught me what the game really was. And I wasn't going to lose again. 2 days later, while scrolling through LinkedIn, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. The profile photo was blank. The message was short. "I know what he did to you." At first, I thought it was a scam. But then they sent a file, a spreadsheet of financial records tied to Barton & Wells. Hidden bonuses. Off-the-book payments. Evidence of funds being rerouted to personal accounts under Greg's initials. The sender's name appeared after a pause, Nadia. I remembered her, a financial analyst who'd worked at Barton & Wells 3 years ago. She was fired suddenly after calling out accounting inconsistencies in a board meeting. I never knew what happened to her. Until now. She wanted to meet. Said she had something that could take Greg down completely. I hesitated for maybe a minute before typing back, when and where. He took everything from me, my job, my code, my name in the company I helped build. But he forgot the most dangerous thing a man can lose. Fear. We met in a small cafe on the edge of downtown, the kind where no one asks questions, and the music's just loud enough to blur conversation. Nadia looked older than I remembered. Not in a bad way, just tired, like someone who'd seen the system chew up too many decent people. She had a laptop under her arm and a folder in her hand. She didn't bother with small talk. "He stole your work, didn't he?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were pages of internal financials. Dozens of off-book transfers. False invoices. Employee bonus funds rerouted into a private account ending in the same 4 digits Greg used for everything, 1189. He used my department to move money, she said. When I confronted him, he said I was misinterpreting data. A week later, I was out. NDA. Blacklisted. I asked her why she'd reached out now. Because he's about to sell Barton and Wells to himself, she said. And if he does, everyone who ever worked under him becomes disposable. Then she leaned in and said the one sentence that changed everything. But the sale isn't final yet. Over the next few days, Nadia and I worked in silence, in a rented co-working space, 2 laptops glowing like twin conspiracies. She had access to shell databases, I had years of internal architecture knowledge. Together, we mapped Greg's fake holding company, Northbridge Holdings. Except it wasn't registered anywhere. It was still just a draft in a lawyer's email chain. That meant one thing, it was available. So we built it ourselves. We created a legitimate Northbridge Holdings, registered under my name through a layered trail of proxies and trusts. We gave it the exact same structure Greg had planned, the same corporate language, the same investor deck. Except this version was real. Legal. Traceable. Ours. We didn't need to expose him. We just needed to beat him to his own crime. But building a company overnight takes money, real money. I had savings, sure, but not enough to buy controlling shares of Barton and Wells. That's when Nadia mentioned 2 names, investors she'd worked with before. One ran a private fund in Seattle. The other was a venture capitalist I'd once helped debug a product for, years ago, when I was still naive enough to do favors for free. Both of them had one thing in common, they hated Greg. We pitched them in a late-night video call. No presentation. No slides. Just the truth. A corrupt executive stealing his employees' work and trying to sell his own company to himself under a fake name. A chance to buy it first, clean, legal, with insider insight. They didn't even blink. Send the paperwork, one of them said. Within 48 hours, the capital transfer cleared. Northbridge Holdings officially had the funds to acquire Barton and Wells. I remember staring at the confirmation email, the numbers blurring on the screen. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Greg fired me. Power. We worked non-stop after that, filing paperwork, signing contracts, initiating the buyout quietly while Greg was still celebrating his strategic layoffs. He was posting photos from high-end restaurants, writing self-congratulatory posts about streamlined growth. He had no idea the company he bragged about was already being sold, not to him, but to me. By day 5, everything was in motion. Northbridge's acquisition request went through the board without resistance. Greg had burned too many bridges, most of the board wanted him gone anyway. They just needed someone with the right paperwork and funding to take over. We had both. That night, as I watched the final contract draft render on the screen, Nadia looked at me and smiled faintly. You realize this makes you his boss, right? I smiled back, but my chest felt heavier than I expected. I don't want to be his boss, I said. I just want him to understand what he did. The next morning, I put on my best suit. I didn't sleep. Didn't eat. I just stared at my reflection and thought about every night I'd stayed late fixing Greg's mistakes, every bonus he took credit for, every time he'd said, "It's not personal, Mark." When I walked into the Barton and Wells building again, the security guard looked startled. I handed him a visitor's badge and a folded document. "Tell Greg Lawson the new CEO wants a word," I said. He blinked, confused, but called upstairs. A minute later, I was walking down the same hallway I'd been escorted out of a week earlier. The same gray walls. The same hum of fluorescent lights. Only this time, I wasn't the one being dismissed. I stepped into Greg's office. He didn't recognize me at first, he was too busy laughing on a phone call, bragging about something to an investor. When he finally looked up, he froze. "Mark," he said, like he'd seen a ghost. I just smiled. "This shouldn't take long," I told him, placing the documents on his desk. "You might want to read this carefully." He started to speak, but the words caught in his throat as his eyes scanned the first page. His color drained as he flipped through the next few. The top of the document read, "Acquisition and Change of Leadership Agreement, Barton and Wells Tech. Effective immediately, Northbridge Holdings assumes full control of all operations. Acting CEO, Mark Hale." For a second, the office went silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the slow ticking of the clock above his head. Then Greg tried to laugh. It came out broken. This isn't real," he said. "This can't be." I didn't reply. I just turned toward the window, looking out over the city that used to feel too big for me. "You were right, Greg," I said finally. "Nothing personal." And I walked out before he could answer. That should have been the end. But later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It said only one line. You weren't supposed to buy it. The text came just after midnight. You weren't supposed to buy it. No name. No number. Just that sentence glowing on my screen like a threat. For a moment I thought it was Greg, drunk and bitter. But the sender wasn't him. It was hidden behind an encrypted ID, the kind you only see in movies. Someone else was watching. I didn't sleep. By morning the deal was final, Barton & Wells was now mine. Walking through those glass doors felt surreal. The same receptionist who'd escorted me out a week ago nearly dropped her coffee. I smiled, said good morning, and kept walking. Greg's office stood open, stripped bare. No photos, no trophies, just the outline of dust where his nameplate used to sit. The chair that once held power was empty now, and for the first time, the place smelled like something clean. I told myself it was over. But that message, it wouldn't leave my head. I started combing through Greg's old files, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand. Every folder was an echo of arrogance, meetings, bonuses, travel receipts for five-star hotels. Buried under all that, I found a trail of private notes, lists of names, account numbers, half-written memos to someone called Harrison. It didn't look like business. It looked like orders. Greg hadn't just been stealing credit or money. He'd been part of something bigger, feeding information to people outside the company. I didn't know who they were, but I knew they wouldn't like losing their inside man. That message finally made sense. 2 days later a thick envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a photograph, me, sitting in that cafe with Nadia the week before. On the back, "You're in over your head." I stared at it for a long time, my stomach cold. Someone had followed us. Watched us. I showed it to Nadia that night. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Then they're scared." She was right. Fear meant pressure. Pressure meant cracks. And cracks meant leverage. We didn't call the police. We didn't hide. We started gathering everything Greg had left behind, receipts, fake contracts, deleted messages. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I wanted truth. 3 days later, the truth arrived on every screen in the city. High-profile investment firm under federal investigation. Greg's face flashed under the headline, "Caught leaving a courthouse, eyes down, hair disheveled." The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Everyone at Barton & Wells knew who'd taken his seat. Employees came by my office one by one. Some shook my hand. Some just smiled quietly. The same people he'd fired were the ones rebuilding the place now. For a brief moment, I felt peace. Then, late that evening, I found an envelope inside Greg's old desk, taped underneath the drawer like a secret. On the front, in his messy handwriting, "For whoever replaces me." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a flash drive. The paper read, "You think you won. You just took my place in the game." I hesitated, then plugged in the drive. The video opened on Greg sitting behind that same desk, smirking at the camera. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Congratulations, Mark. You figured out the first half. But the people I worked for, they don't lose quietly. You didn't buy freedom. You bought their attention." The screen went black. For a moment I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the monitor. I thought about what he'd said, about all the power he used to believe he had. Then I reached for the drive, snapped it in half, and threw it in the trash. Greg's world was built on fear. Mine wouldn't be. When I walked out of the office that night, the building looked different. The lights hummed softly, the city beyond the window seemed wider somehow. The same security guard who'd watched me leave in shame a week ago gave me a small nod this time. It wasn't victory I felt, it was closure. Greg was finished. The company was clean. And whoever he'd been working for could come looking if they wanted. I wasn't the same man they thought they could scare. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel small. I felt untouchable. The headlines hit like a hammer. Former executive under investigation for fraud. Greg's photo was everywhere. The same confident grin he'd worn while firing people now looked strained and hollow. Every news outlet tore him apart, the fake contracts, the offshore money, the lies. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Watching the truth do the work was enough. 2 weeks later, I called a company-wide meeting. The room was full, people Greg had ignored, overworked, or fired without notice. They stared at me, waiting for a speech. All I said was, "No one here loses their job for someone else's mistake again." That was it. No slogans. No applause. Just silence, then a few nods. It was enough. Business picked up faster than I expected. The clients Greg scared away came back. The projects he abandoned were finished. We cut waste, paid back debts, and the numbers turned green again. For the first time, Barton & Wells wasn't built on someone else's ego. Nadia became CFO. She was the first person I trusted with full access. She handled things quietly and directly, no politics, no speeches. Exactly how it should have been all along. One afternoon, my assistant handed me a letter from Greg's lawyer. It was short, he wanted to open a dialogue. I didn't answer. The next week he tried again, this time through an old colleague. Greg wants to apologize, the message said. I threw it away. He'd made his choices. So had I. We replaced the old company logo, that fake phoenix he'd plastered everywhere, with the original version I designed years ago. The team printed it on the lobby wall in silver and black. Simple. Clean. Honest. Every time I passed it, I felt the same thing, closure. Not pride. Just closure. Months passed. The investigation ended with multiple arrests. Greg took a plea deal. 5 years, no parole. The investors who backed him faced fines that would take decades to recover from. I didn't testify. They already had enough evidence. The day his sentence was announced, I went to work like normal. Meetings, calls, budgets. Around lunch, Nadia stepped into my office holding 2 coffees. She didn't say anything, she just placed one on my desk. I looked up and said, "It's over." She nodded. "Then let's get back to work." That was the whole conversation. Nothing else needed saying. The company rebuilt itself piece by piece. We hired back the people Greg fired. We offered fair contracts, better benefits, clearer policies. Small things that made a big difference. There were no speeches about culture or family. We just worked, got paid, and went home proud. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about fixing what they broke. Late one night, I stayed behind to finish reports. The building was empty except for the hum of the air vents. Greg's old chair still sat in the corner, I hadn't thrown it out yet. I turned it around once and noticed the tear in the armrest, the one I'd stared at while he fired me. I left it there. It reminded me what happens when people forget decency. On my wall hung 2 frames, my business license and Greg's termination letter. Same format, same font. His name where mine once was. Not for pride. For proof. Proof that you can lose everything and still come back stronger, if you stay quiet, smart, and patient. When I finally left the building that night, the lobby lights reflected off the new logo on the wall. The security guard waved. Same man as before, same calm look. "Long week?" he asked. "Long year," I said. He smiled. "Worth it?" I nodded. "Every minute." Outside, the street was quiet. No drama. No speeches. Just the sound of my shoes on the pavement and the cool air on my face. A week ago, I was the man being escorted out of this building. Now, I was the one holding the keys. That's not luck. That's correction. And Greg? He's exactly where people like him end up, behind a locked door, blaming everyone else. I don't think about him anymore. There's too much work to do.